So there was a video not too long ago from Ristic Studies about Brian Chippendale. He's an artist. He's done a couple magic cards and like a lot of other stuff. There are other videos about him that are more about the other stuff. That list of stuff includes the band that he's been in for ever, apparently, a band called Lightning Bolt. In the Ristic Studies video, there's just a passing little mention like, oh yeah, he's been in a band called Lightning Bolt for about as long as we've been casting Lightning Bolt. They're the same name. In that video, that's a total throwaway little bit of narrative. But it does touch on something that I had been thinking about kind of in the background for a while. There are a bunch of cards in Magic that, man, that name just feels like it should be a band or like an album. You know? Wizards has leaned into this from time to time. But it does make me wonder how often that actually happens. How many lightning bolts do we have? You know, how many bands and Magic cards share the same name? I'll jump to the numerical answer, which is about 8.5%, about 3,000 of them. There's a lot more video. There's a reason for that. But if you just want a general hand-wavy number so you can go watch something else, there you go. As a bit of context, I am also a musician. I'm a drummer. I know some people are going to be like, you're not a musician. I've been in bands. Damn it. So that sort of overlap is just sort of incidentally interesting to me. Also, being in bands means that I had to name those bands. Naming things is hard. You can ask anyone who has done creative text for Magic. Naming things can be very difficult, especially as the game grows and grows, and there are so many cards. And there's only so many things you can really name a card that makes sense, that fit aesthetically. And the same is true for bands at the end of the day. We do need to define the parameters that we're working under. For one, what is a Magic card? That one should be easy. You know, we have Scryfall. Scryfall has a list of everything. And I do mean everything. So that alone introduces a couple of headaches into all of this. Like, do we count planes for the plane chase? Do we count contraptions? Do we count those heroes from that Theros product that had hero cards? Sure, why not? There is a very accessible list on Scryfall of every card. It's just every card, every name of every card, and it includes everything, and it was simple. But even then, there's a bit of extra work that goes into this, because Consider is perfectly fine, but a card like Beck and Call. There is no Magic card named Beck and Call, but there is a spell for Magic called Call. It's the second half of that card. The card that colloquially that might all get left in. The card that, in our everyday parlance, we would refer to as Beck and Call, because it's Beck and Call. But those are two different spells, and one of those is a guy. So, how do we want to handle those? Well, fortunately, Scryfall does split those apart in a relatively consistent fashion. Fuse cards, adventures, anything where one card is two spells, I was able to break those apart and just focus on the spells individually. Because I am going to be a stickler about this. It is not a match unless every letter lines up. I'll give a little bit of leeway for punctuation and spacing and capitalization, but that's the easy part. Here's the hard part. What's a band? It is so easy to just kind of vibes that out, but that's not going to help for this project that I'm trying to do. I can just say that I'm a band. I can say that I make music as heir apparent. And would that count? No. But I also don't want to use a definition of band or musician that cuts off too many people. Because, I mean, music is crazy. Bands start up each and every day. I saw another one just the other day, but we won't get into that. But if you only see them performing at your neighborhood dive bar, and that's all they ever do, I would say they are a band, but I can't prove it. And that's part of the challenge. There is, to my knowledge, no database that has the little college group that I was in when I was in college, because we were all in college, that we never recorded anything. We played an open mic at a bar called The Standard, and so we named ourselves The Substandards. I got better at naming bands as I got older. That was a fun gig where we did singer-songwriter material, and then hanging out outside with the bassist, because the bassist was underage, you couldn't hang out in the bar. Someone who was very drunk really liked how much we sounded like the Ramones. We did a Beatles cover. Playing live music is great. Anyway, to do this, I'm kind of forced into some level of limitation. So what do I use as my authority on what music be? And you can think, well, where would I go to find all the music I possibly could? You could, use Spotify. You probably use Spotify, but a lot of bands aren't on there. Sometimes just for distribution reasons, sometimes for economical reasons, sometimes it's political. Any service that doesn't have King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard isn't a valid option for this. The best that I was able to find and I was able to work with is just using the Discogs API. If you're not familiar with Discogs, it's designed around the selling and trading of records and CDs, recorded music in general. So it has quite a lot of that. I'm not going to claim it has everything, but it does have stuff that surprises me. It also has stuff that, as far as I can tell, is digital only. So it covers a lot of bases that otherwise you might have to hit up Bandcamp or something else that's exclusively digital to, fill in those gaps. As far as I can tell, those gaps are filled. So, okay, we have the list of cards and a way to get a list of musicians and bands, basically. The logic of doing this it's probably straightforward enough. You probably already know what I ultimately did, at least in the broad strokes. You go down the list of every spell in Magic the Gathering, and for every one, we just search Discogs. That's a lot. I'm not doing that manually. I'm unemployed, but not that unemployed. So, hey, I'll fall back on the skills that I have professionally. I just wrote some code. It's not even hard. Code is like 40 lines by the end of the day. And, Discogs, it has an API. It has good API wrappers. Again, you don't actually have to understand what I'm saying. Just know this pair, nice. So I just did exactly that. Went down every single one and asked the Discogs API, like, hey, do you have any artist under this name? And I knew from, doing a little bit of spot investigation with Beck, the artist that you're thinking of might not be under that name. Consider Nirvana. There was a group before Nirvana called Nirvana. There was a lawsuit about this. But this happens. This happens quite a lot, that multiple bands have the same name. It happened a lot more before the internet. So Discogs has to have a system to disambiguate, the same way Wikipedia does. But it can come to pass that, the most popular version of that band name isn't the first one. And so you might ask Discogs, hey, do you have an exact match of this? And they'll be like, no. But they do. It's just buried. But it was enough for me to put it together, make the attempt, fire it off, and get rate limited. I should have thought about that part. Yeah, if you've ever worked with APIs and remote data and all of these programmery things, you know that most of the time they're like, yeah, we'll let you have the stuff at a reasonable cadence. So, fair enough. I knew there were issues with how I was requesting the data anyway, so cleaned those up, did a little bit more spot checking, put in a delay, and gave it another go. And this started off working pretty well, until it didn't. Error handling is a thing that exists. There are software engineering principles that I know and I should follow, even in a 40-line Python script. Like, come on. I also went and cleaned up some of the matching fuzziness. So the way I approached it was just, I'll ask Discogs for a match, and whatever it gives me, we'll take that. And if it's very close or exact, then we got something. If it's way off, okay, you tried. This was returning consistently actual matches, actual results. For 2 days, I'm limited to 60 a minute, and then you count all the times that it blows up. Yeah, this took about 2 days to run. And even with all of the results in, it wasn't perfect. I had set it up so an exact or nearly exact match, would all get grouped into one bucket. I'd have a big list of those, but I never had an exact match. So I did end up having to go through all of those nearly exact matches and figure out which ones were actual exact matches. If you're wondering at what point I felt like I lost the plot, it was way before that. But, you commit to the bit. But committing to the bit got me this list of like 3,000 cards. The Discogs artist database has like photographers and illustrators as well, and I was not going to curate and clean up all of that. The exact number was 3,073, and that works out to about 8.5% of all the cards in Magic, which is less than I thought. Because if you think about it, a lot of early Magic cards, and especially the early ones, had pretty straightforward, basic names. Anything from Preacher to Crop Rotation. Things that were just a generic name or a generic phrase. Of these 3,000 or so, most of them have no connection to Magic whatsoever. So it's less about intentional overlap and more about vibes. Now, like I said, I didn't go through every single artist on the list, but I did do some spot checks to make sure things were functioning. And I looked at ones that just kind of caught my eye, like Nicol Bolas. That was a little bit of a surprise to show up on the list. And when I checked to, double check, I found that there is also Nico Bolas, actual human man Nico Bolas, who is an audio engineer and has been working in the industry for quite a while. As far as I can tell, he's still working in the industry or has recently retired, but has been at it long enough to have been the audio engineer on Toto's Africa. Sure, why not? You also end up finding all sorts of weird stories when you go and look up just the weird and wonderful world of music. There are a number of artists reflected in this list that, look, this is not an endorsement of anyone who is on the list or of any cards. Some of the cards that are just written off for cultural insensitivity, they're on the list because that's a match. And certainly there are some bands that should be written off for similar reasons. Fortunately, from what I can tell, most of the other Universes Beyond overlaps are totally fine. And yes, there are a lot of names on this list that are on the list because of Universes Beyond cards. In some cases, that's because of the use of actual human person names. Sometimes, though, it's just a lack of epithets, But then you have, the Doctor Who pre-con decks that just have Bill Potts. It's just a guy's name. Yasmin Khan. That's just a woman's name, which makes it much easier for those overlaps to happen. But even across all 3,000-ish cards in this list, there's only about 250 that are added by Universes Beyond. They do add a lot of legendaries. Sometimes the reason that name is present is a little surprising. Bill Potts, actual jazz man. But Miles Tails Prower isn't on the list because of Sega. Not directly. Anyway, it's just someone named Jaden who, every time they put out music, seems to use a new alias. There's one story related to this that I do need to share. I discovered something and I have to report it. So because of the Assassin's Creed set that happened, we have a bunch of characters from Assassin's Creed, the video game, in Magic the Gathering. One of them is Desmond Miles, the main character from the first couple of games. And yeah, there has been a real musician named Desmond Miles. As it happened, actual Desmond Miles, he was a bassist, played reggae, rocksteady kind of stuff for the Mighty Vikings, which is, according to their own Facebook page, a very historically relevant group out of Kingston, Jamaica. We're recording in the 60s and 70s. That's when real Desmond was active, and as far as I can tell, still had stuff going on well into the 2000s. Now, if you're familiar with Assassin's Creed, Desmond Miles canonically dies on December 12th, 2012. And I have been referring to actual Desmond in the past tense because, he was an active musician in the 60s and 70s. Not a huge surprise that he has since passed on. And the best information that I have says that he did so on December 11th, 2012. I don't think there's anything meaningful to take from this coincidence. I just think it's really bizarre that I stumbled upon this overlap between real-world reggae musician and video game protagonist while digging around in Magic the Gathering. But look, I know I'm dancing around the real question that most Magic the Gathering players have, and it's, can you build a commander deck like this? Yeah, you legitimately can. There are quite a lot of legends that you can use to helm your deck. Most of them are Universes Beyond, yes. That's what happens when you bring in characters who have a lot of pop culture relevance. I highly doubt that the hip-hop duo who decided to call themselves Bebop and Rocksteady had any interest in Magic the Gathering at the time they did so. But they did, and now there's a card named that, and you can put it in your commander deck, if you so wish. And if you don't want to use Universes Beyond for this incredibly silly Bracket 1 commander idea, sure, a bunch of the original legends are options as well, anywhere from Chromium to Angus Mackenzie. You can use 6. Build a mono-green 6 deck where every card is the name of a band. Every basic land is available to you. And a lot of the original dual lands, more than half. We're probably not getting a Suburban Sanctuary anytime soon, but that's just, you know how musicians are, okay? Go listen to Arcade Fire. I mentioned that the Scryfall list gave me everything in terms of Magic card product, and there are enough planes. You can plane chase. Let me reach out a frame. I even made a full commander deck where every card shares its name with a musician or an artist on Discogs. Now, is this the best Hopus theme deck that's ever been made? Obviously not. It's very slapped together, but it does have a game plan to a certain, Bracket 1 definition. It does work. In here, there's Propaganda, there's Voice of Victory, there's Mockingbird. This isn't a way to build the best commander deck possible, obviously, but it's a way to build weird commander decks with a particular theme and a particular restriction. And to make it relatively simple to follow along with the restriction, I did go and make card packages on Architect for all of the cards that, at time of recording, they have all of the cards where they fit this criteria. And they're broken down by color because the one with everything in it, it could crash your browser. your computer would have to be having some troubles, but like it was legitimately slowing things down for me. And those will be available here and linked below, as YouTube lets me. And I am genuinely curious what kinds of decks people figure out how to smush together under this restriction. I was putting together a Bebop and Rocksteady. I put together an Eddie Brock. There are some bad options and bad ideas that you could take, but there are some perfectly viable decks. The point of this was not to make powerful or even viable commander decks. I didn't even expect to be able to when I set out on this. I set out on this because why not? It was an intellectual curiosity. I wanted to know. Yes, this whole thing is ultimately silly and pointless, but so is Magic, if we're being honest, so why not? Have some whimsy. And, it creates a level of challenge if you're going to try to build decks this way. It really does constrain you. All of the Universes Beyond cards that are in there, I'm not surprised, naming your band after some media thing, that's not even weird, The Dismemberment Plan, they're named after a line in Groundhog Day. Shook 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 did the same for The Gods Must Be Crazy. You used to not be able to Google that band, but at the same time, this list has stuff like Amaru Kithkin. It has Order of the Ebon Hand, old school cards that are extremely magic. And I can't prove it because I didn't go investigate or interview or anything like that, but I feel like it's obvious for those two that those were bands named out of a fondness for Magic the Gathering. And I highly doubt they're the only ones. And honestly, if you're looking at that card list being like, I can't make a deck, it doesn't have this one card, go start that band yourself, As one last bit of housekeeping before I thank you for watching, this was all done and recorded around when Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was the active set. Editor Hupfin here. This took so long to put together for reasons. Secrets of Strixhaven did come out. I added the cards from that set that are applicable to the list, so it is up to date there. And I might keep doing that set by set. Kind of depends on if there's interest from other folks. I'm definitely not going and doing a back search through all the old cards. If someone wants to start a band from an old card name, I'm gonna miss it. This was never going to be an exact list regardless. But I do have that Popus theme deck, and I will have it with me at MagicCon, which I'll be going to very soon, based on when this is uploading. I don't have a lot of free time in my schedule. I have a lot of stuff going on. I have a few ticketed things that I'm scheduled for, so I might not actually be able to get to play it. But if this is of interest to you, then you can at least come say hi. So the list is never going to be perfectly accurate. I'm fine with that. But if there is interest and curiosity, maybe I'll keep running it. Let me know what you think in the comments. I have called you to action. I never said I was good at this. Thanks for listening. And maybe watching. I don't know if I'm not. This is second monitor content. First monitor content has sign-offs.